Good afternoon, members, and welcome to today's Insights and Innovations webinar. Today, we welcome the team from Val Morgan Cinema, who is presenting Big Screen Attention. So now I welcome and I will pass over to Guy Burbidge, Managing Director of Val Morgan Cinema. Thanks, Guy.
Great, thanks, Beck. Guys, thank you on a rainy Monday, particularly up in Sydney. So this is our Big Screen Attention, world first attention-based model for cinema, Prezzo. The good news is you're not going to hear too much from me. I come in at the back end of it just to finish off with some lovely and decisive cinema facts. But the main star of the show and all of this goodness about attention is Dr. Karen Nelson-Field, who is luckily managed to get into her schedule, and she is here to take us through the crux of the project, what we're here to solve for, what Karen's business is solving for, but also just some of the core detail and where some of the information that she's been working on through her business Amplified Intelligence. So I'm going to hand over to her. I'm going to drive, so there might be a little bit of tension between screens and what Karen's saying, but we'll try to get that right. And then at the end, I'll come in and take you through some of the cinema details and why we think it's a boon for us as a business. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Karen.
Thanks, Guy. Do you want to just jump in straight into the next slide? So I usually like to kind of do a bit of a 5-minute on defining the problem that we're solving for, because attention data, attention currency, attention metrics, it's just all getting sort of swept up in confusion. So the best place for me to start is to sort of explain what we're actually solving for, how we as a business approach scaled data collection, and then, you know, course correct, because the attention economics, the concept of attention economics theoretically is about understanding the cause of inattention, the consequences, and the course correct. So let's start with a definition. And I didn't make this up. This is something that comes from largely psychology literature, but attention is the concept that, you know, a human will stop and pay some sort of awareness or / you know, fleeting moment of their precious time while kind of pushing other things out for the purpose of learning something, for the purpose of mental evaluation. So concentrated awareness for even a fleeting moment in time while ignoring other stuff for the purpose of mental evaluation. If you think about that, that's exactly what advertisers want, but it's easy to say, hard to achieve in the context of marketing, because quite frankly, a lot of it, the time we're not really interested in paying concentrated awareness to a particular ad. Just for background, this is how and you've probably read this a million times now, but again, I didn't make this up. We got this from literature, but there are different ways that humans interact with stimuli. Let's just call it ads. One is that they pay absolute gross attention, active attention to it, where they, you know, they're absolutely sort of engrossed in it. They are literally looking at the ad on screen rather than sort of paying attention to things going on around them. Passive attention is when we essentially collect for when someone's doing something else other than looking straight at the ad. They might be near to the ad. In the case of mobile, for example, it's when they're reading the feed, but not the ad. In the case of longer form attention, it's when they're dual screening or they're talking to their friends, but the tech can still tell that they're close to the ad. So that's passive attention, and non-attention is the obvious. In the case of television, it's when, you know, you're walking away like to go out of the room. In the case of, you know, mobile, it's when the tech knows you're there, but you're absolutely literally not anywhere near or possibly near the ad at all. So active, passive, and non-attention is a really important definition. This is kind of what marketers hope for. So the concept of, you know, reach-based planning is off the back of the fact that, you know, advertisers pay sustained and largely undivided concentrated awareness to an ad, and that is not the case. What is actually the case is the next slide, which is we flick or switch between active, passive, and non in quite quick succession often. Sometimes we have moments where there's more concentrated awareness, but it's more when, you know, so thinking about a mobile, for example, you quickly glance down at the ad, but then you read your feed for a while, then you talk to your friends for a while, and then you go back to the feed, and then the ad takes your attention. And there's this constant switching behavior that happens. And the problem with that is the time in view clicker is going, but in fact attention is not being paid to the ad, and therein lies the entire problem that we're facing. That the metrics that we use, particularly in digital, have moved away from measuring human interaction, and we rely on this thing called time in view. In fact, I've just dropped a paper in WAC today. It's outside the paywall, so you're most welcome to have a read, where we've started to sort of stop measuring human behavior and make assumptions about the metadata that sits behind digital in particular, that makes assumptions about humans. So I call it the difference between measuring outward, which we used to measure humans all the time, and now we may measure only inward, particularly in digital, and make assumptions about this human behavior. But the reality is those metrics fail us. And this is what this paper is about, because human viewing is very, very different from a click, a counter measuring time in view. And this is the result. So, you know, MRC viewability standard gets a bit of a raw deal, but the reality is they founded viewable inventory off of an input variable that fails us. So time in view fails us. So that means that anything that's based on seconds or completions fails, and MRC accredited inventory is the same. So to say that it's 2 seconds of time plus 50% pixels, it's the time bit that's broken. So we know that around 70 to 75% of the time you buy MRC accredited inventory, humans aren't looking. And that's a lot to do with, I think, the next slide, Guy. That's a lot to do with this. So this is what you'll see in this paper, that actually time in view is the fundamental failure. And, you know, I think even on the first 10 seconds, I think the best a relationship can get to is about 1 in 3 chance that someone's looking, which relates back to the MRC stuff. So the longer ads go, the worse that relationship gets. So the longer time in view doesn't actually relate to more human engagement. It's the opposite. The more switching, basically the ad is sitting there doing nothing while humans are engrossed in the feed. So this is the problem we face. And this is why I am, as a business, really interested in course correcting for this. What's next? So we talk about that our current measurement fails us, but people don't understand the significant flow-on effects of inequitable impressions. It's not just the obvious. Obviously, you've probably seen the hoo-ha that's been on recently about, you know, reach-based planning, and Byron Sharp sort of chiming in, but his remarkable lack of understanding of how ads are delivered is not, it is the point that reach-based planning doesn't work, because the distributions or the volume that you get of attention does vary significantly by channel and platform and format. But it has a flow-on effect to things like share of voice, share of market, MMMs, creative strategy, all sorts of things. Not to mention on a digital forum, we also know that the largest, which are the largest, you know, obviously people put a lot of money into digital, but a lot of the time, a large proportion of the ads don't even hit this thing called attention memory threshold. Next one. We know, I'll get to what that is. We know that memory starts to kick in at about 2.5 seconds. So I call that, you know, the attention memory threshold. So an ad needs to be in view roughly about 2.5 seconds for someone to actually, what we said before, cognitively understand or kind of learn something from that ad. It does vary depending on the size of the brand, but that's kind of the perfect sort of line in the sand. And I did this one for Cannes earlier this year. When we know, when a lot of switching happens between active, passive and non, particularly on in the digital space, I pulled a random 130,000 ad views out of the data, and lots of brands, lots of ad views. About 85% of them didn't even hit that threshold. So if you think about what the implications are for mental availability, let alone instant, you know, performance marketing, but certainly for longer form memory forming, it has major implications. What's next? So we know, I mean, you know, I've got plenty of evidence on this, so I can send anyone anything, but we've proven over and over and over that there is a relationship between active attention and both upper and lower funnel outcomes. So upper funnel is obviously mental availability, and lower funnel is brand choice. So we know that it's important. And part of my job in my business was to, the first 3 years, we were sort of trying to understand whether attention was important, whether it meant something and was different to what we already have, and did drive outcomes which are very different to the other metrics that are in place, and they do. So then I get thrown this question all the time. That's easy. Let's just build better creative and that will fix it. But it doesn't work that way. So different platforms have a different range of attention that it allows you. And it's the nature of the user interface. So, and I know Guy's going to talk to you about this, but a classic example is if you have the capacity to scroll, you will scroll. Therefore, the amount of attention that you can achieve on that particular platform is less than a format where you're locked in and you can't scroll. So each platform and each format has this range. And so therefore, I think the next slide, creative is tempered by that. And what that means is if you've got the same ad and you put it on the best performing platform, the next best performing, then in line, the amount of attention that it gains will be in line with the overall amount of attention that it allows you to have due to its user interface. So classic example is brand A on platform A gets 7 seconds, then it's 5.5, then it's 3.3. So, but it's the same ad. And so the point being is, even if you have a Cannes Line award-winning ad on one platform, it might allow you to get 15 seconds because it's a piece of high emotional, amazing creative. And then, you know, perhaps on web, for example, the best you're going to get, even at the top end, is about 3 seconds. So it's not the creative that drives the overall amount of attention. It's the platform that defines what attention range you have. And your job as an advertiser is then to make sure that you have the best possible creative to get at the top of that range. That's confusing, so I'll explain that another time. So we do see this hierarchy of effects, and there's plenty of papers on that if you want access to this, but it's hard for a lot of creatives, and I'm sure there are some of you in the room that struggle with this, but creative is, it's not that creative is not important. It's not at the lowest part of the hierarchy because it's not important, because it is, but it's not what drives attention. What drives attention is platform first, format, context, the demographics, and then the creative falls within that. So your job is always to try and make sure you have amazing creative. But again, it's tempered by the platform and the format and the context of the media. So, you know, this problem also impacts the ability for a brand to be noticed. So if they're a distribution, so basically a classic example is if there's a high scrollable format, you think that you can put your ad on at, you know, second 10 or second 12 or 15 or 20 or whatever it is. But the reality is, in this particular case, this is real data, 40% watched actively in the first few seconds, but at the branded moment, about 5% on average that you are reaching for has actually seen your brand exposure. So that has a lot of implications for being chosen at the other end. And what's the next one? So even when branding is early, depending on the format that you choose, if the distribution is really steep, this is sort of showing you that about 63% scrolled away super fast. And even with the brand there at second 2, only 30% of the reach you paid for is looking at the ad. So it's incumbent on you guys as creatives to make sure that you allow for this distribution, that your creative strategy accounts for the brand being up really early. Next one. So when a brand is missing, we fill in the blanks. And this is true. So we see this in our own data. If low attention platforms drive more mental availability for your competitor than for you. And in some cases, it's a lot to do with the way that the creative is built because the brand is missing. Okay, so how do we fix the problem? The first thing to think about is not to think of it as a currency unto itself. I think there's a lot of attention's in land grab at the moment. I do genuine, and so there's a lot of differing opinions. I genuinely believe that it'll act as signals for existing data. So I don't ever see it as being a true reach currency. That is the currency. We're talking about humans as well. When you're filming people, you can't, it's called surveillance. If you were, you know, surveilling 30,000 people in every country for the rest of their lives. But I believe the human data acts as a signal or weighting to I guess, equalize the error that sits underneath it. So planning So we have planning signals, we have buying signals, and there's verification as well. I think they're the next two slides, Guy.
Yep.
So we are very, so go to the last one. So we're really fussy about omnichannel attention. So I always get asked about, you know, if TV and cinema and mobile, etc. But the reality is we use gaze tracking or facial recognition technology to use the same mathematical models regardless of whether it's close to the face, further away from the face, big screen. Now we're even doing outdoor with pose tracking as well. So in my personal, humble, educated opinion, when the models are equal in the way that they talk about active, passive, and non, and when the models are trained off of facial footage in the same way, then we have something truly universal, which is what our business goal has been.
All right, great. So guys, I just wanted to stop there. Any questions for Karen? All right, I'm going to crack on. So guys, just taking you through the cinema component, and I think so the reason we've been talking with Karen for a long time, and those conversations started back in 2019. Those conversations started, as I said, back in 19. Small interruption of 18 odd months there before we could start moving into an in-cinema data collection period for our pilot, which happened in March. We've then launched measurement at scale in June and July once we worked out what we could conduct. We had the right technology, we had the right settings, we had the right capabilities to conduct a much larger, more robust, scalable data collection program across both Australia and New Zealand. And then the delivery of results, which are not too far away, in line with some product updates coming from the Amplified Intelligence team. So it's been a long program, and you would have, certainly with us, we've been saying a lot of the same kind of things. What drives our platform, but the need to have a business like Karen's where we can do this in a real life setting, which is a number one and significant hurdle, was pretty big. So we have set this up to have our phases in cinema, and this phase here through the data, the pilot, was all around how do we validate the hardware so that it could take advantage in the real life setting of the cinema location. So all this was about is not in a lab, giving a true sense of how people really interact with the screen, and making sure the technology can pick up all the variables within different size cinemas across Australia and New Zealand. This then moved into that phase 2 that I mentioned, where we had 80 people over 3 movie sessions, and then phase 3, that final data collection piece, was about having over 13 sessions, A and Z, and looking at a different mix of movies to try and understand any differences within the data, rather than just the same types of content. So being pretty robust. It's taken us a long time to get here, but as I mentioned, the important part really was having that capacity to have that consistency across channels, a real life setting, and some scalable results that can really make this as robust as possible. 3 key findings from the study. First of all, 100% attention. So Karen mentioned active and passive. We're not here to, as Val Morgan, we're not here to say active is better or worse than passive. Passive absolutely plays a role, but what was very pleasing and potentially slightly expected from some quarters was the fact that there was 0 wastage. So at every point in time, every impression counts from a cinema delivery point of view. This was delivered on all formats from 15s through to 60s, and that was the test range. So you might consider 15 seconds long form creative these days. We certainly have a perspective that 6 seconds, unless they're tied into some sort of either bumper for a longer form creative in the pre-show, 6 seconds is not our bag. We will argue till we're blue in the face that spending time with brand is good for it, and we are that platform that can deliver at that higher end. But the important part was that all of those, that range of attention is delivered fully through 15s and 60s. So the higher you get, the better, or the continued attention scores you get, and it doesn't degrade over time, which is a unique feature of the platform. And then sustained attention throughout the pre-show. So outside of some smaller movements around, you know, it started off high, it ended high, and that consistency right through the board, right through, is a really interesting one when you think around how other media channels behave. So starting off, we mentioned active up front. We are one of the platforms that delivers the highest proportion of active viewing, and that is our range, as Karen mentioned, the elasticity. So at average, it's about 61, but that proportion can stretch based on creative up as high as 76, 77, and then down to sort of just late 50s. And when you're comparing platform 1, 2, and 3 there, unfortunately, we won't be naming them. But yeah, good result, and an important thing, particularly when we're talking around big messages, relaunches. That's when active comes into play, where you've got a lot of complexity to deliver, rather than just doing a reminding job. And then as Karen showed you there, the talk around decay a lot, and I think this is one of the features. You know, we are not going to be sitting here saying you should do active versus passive. You know, that's certainly your job as comms specialists to figure that out. But what we are going to tell you is, you know, is the benefits that we provide. And as Karen mentioned, that decay happens consistently across all of other platforms. So you start to see a high proportion of non-attention creeping in. Some start high and then decay quickly. Some are more consistent. So platform 1 and 2, probably in the TV and the BVOD realm. Platform 3 and 4 might be just some of our digital friends. I have some ideas who they might be, which I'll share with you over a glass at some point in time. But what is interesting around this one is that value proposition all the way through the ad length that we are really keen on demonstrating. So that time go by, that non-attention increases. So as you said, you got, you know, the grey bar is the piece that is probably the most destructive to comms and reach-based planning, because you are simply not getting what you are paying for as you go later into commercials right across the board on quite a number of channels. The good news is we have zero wastage, as we mentioned up front. So that attention is held throughout those different time lengths, as people consistently will deliver you some value. There is no non-attention. So if you're looking for big brand moments, building in a storyline, you know, looking to deliver the logo at the end piece, is you can be assured of that delivery on our platform, which is interesting. And you still see clients, as you guys would know, using the same homogenous creative across TV, digital, cinema, and it's really having an impact because that is not being delivered in its entirety. And that no decay of attention, this one really more reflects, yes, it says ad length down there, but it's really more reflect through the pre-show. So that consistency is critical, rather than being in the middle of an ad break versus the first and lasting break. And that is, you know, one of the key benefits that we have seen come out of this first part of the research, and why we believe we deliver those results. And so the kind of final slide before we throw it open to questions, and I think, you know, if there are any questions, we'll get to that in a sec. But, you know, I think for us, what this means is, you know, ultimately I'm going to shift straight to point 2. You know, we certainly see this as a reason why we should be considered beyond a nice to have. And if you are, it's almost, if you believe in the concept of not all reach and impressions are created equal, this is a great example of what we mean by that. Cinema delivers true value right across the board, and if you couple that with some tough audiences, some solid seasonal moments, some big cultural moments, you know, we are very much, this is about challenging that nice to have status and pushing us into a must buy. We're certainly not going to be right for everything. We understand that, and we're very, very fine with that. But the consistency is really around trying to change this conversation away from the headline CPM and that headline cost analysis, and really having more of a value-based conversation. And that's where, as Karen mentioned, those attention, those planning signals, if you're looking for more, got complexity, got more difficult messaging, delightful long-form creative, you know, we are that home for that. And we think those brand signals, although that planning signal is going to come forward in what we're seeing from the market at the moment, is a quality index CPM planning matrix. Lots of different agencies have got their different approaches and ingredients to it, but what it is doing is having that conversation away from cost and into value. And we are going from sometimes 5 or 6 times more expensive, and through our own for our own matrix, we are starting to see us come out at probably 1 or 2 times more expensive. So we are in market at that at the moment. So I'd love to take you guys through that. And our perspective on why we generate more value versus the cost conversation. And then finally is really just partnering. So how do we partner with you to demonstrate the business outcomes of attention? So that is the key next stage for us. And so really open and interested and keen to have those conversations to show you that, you know, moving small percentages of your budget over to us or changing the way that you think about screen strategy is going to deliver you the impact that you need for your business. And that's kind of our next phase for this as we go through into 2023. And that, guys, is the slides for Monday. I think that's hopefully about half an hour, leaving ourselves some time for some questions if there are any.
Generally, there's no questions during, but we do tend to get some posts. So if you're happy, Guy, I can, you know, partner those members with you directly if they have anything they want to follow up on. Yep,
absolutely fine. Guys, if there's, we'll make this presentation available to Beck and the team if anybody wants it, or do get in touch. I think there's some, but if there's no questions while the professor is on the line, I would take advantage.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much, Guy. That really was a fabulous presentation. We will house it on our YouTube channel as well. So for those members, teams that couldn't make it, we'll pass it on to them as well. But really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
See ya. Bye.
Take care.